Okay, this should be a quick video. Um, I actually just saw a video on YouTube about a company owner, and excuse the noises in the background. I live in Puerto Rico, so the neighbors have a lot of animals, and they're noisy sometimes. But hey, I kind of like it, to be honest. Now, according to that video, the owner of the company, which he owns multiple companies, multiple restaurants, he decided to go covert. He decided to see how his employees are faring, how they're doing. You can look it up on YouTube. Company owners or managers or CEOs that go covert. You're gonna find tons of them. The point is, it's interesting because in this case, he was dealing with an employee that was recently promoted to supervisor. He didn't have the best attitude as a supervisor. But again, he probably did not have the right training either. And, not to excuse things, but I think these are things that should be done pretty much everywhere. That not necessarily go covert, but at least have some kind of mechanism to make sure things are being done the right way across the board, Because this guy was a manager. The employees were somewhat tolerating him. But then when he was confronted by the owner, when he identified himself as the owner, the employee got nervous, and he, from the very beginning, said, well, the thing is, I had to be a little more aggressive with the employees because at first they did not take me serious. They just saw me as another guy that used to be an employee, and now he's a supervisor. To acquire or achieve respect, well, he had to change his tone. Not necessarily what he wanted to do, but he had to. Again, that's the excuse. He's probably making it all up. I think the bigger point is that everybody should be held accountable, from the cleaning person to the highest, the CEO, the CFO, whatever, the manager, the executive, the director, whatever. And I think there should be mechanisms at every workplace where true transparency is available, especially when it comes to holding everybody accountable. Most people that already know me will know and understand where I'm coming from. I particularly believe human resources should also clearly be well managed, well supervised. That's where actually, in my opinion, that's where micromanagement should probably exist. What is human resources doing? How are they handling different situations? And is it fairly handled across the board on everybody? When it comes to misbehavior. Human resources should not ever overlook protected groups because they're protected groups. No, the rules should apply equally to everybody. And they should also recognize, look, these guys are doing this. That's not good. Let's adjust them. Let's include in the next training that behavior so we can get rid of it. Same thing for these girls or these alphabet group people, rainbow people. They shouldn't be saying these things, or they should, And this is something, again, I mentioned to HR at U.S. Probation of Puerto Rico, the federal probation office, and I was ignored for years. For years, this was not a month-to-month thing. For years, they just didn't care. And this is the reason why. That manager from that restaurant that owns many restaurants, he gave the guy a break because he understood the situation. He understood that, and to be honest, most workplaces nowadays tend to be toxic. In the sense that starting out, when we have the ideology that the customer is always right, that's iffy because the customer is not always right. I think they might want to rephrase that and say, look, let's keep the customer happy, even when they're wrong. I think that's a more accurate conclusion when it comes to customers. Let's try to keep the customer happy because we want them to come back. But to say the customer is always right, that's a lie. It's a positive lie, but it's a lie. And things don't function well with lies. especially with critical thinkers as myself. And personally, again, I worked at U.S. District Court for Puerto Rico, like some of you already know. It was a bittersweet environment. In the last few years, more bitter than anything else, especially when the when the previous clerk moved on, and now you have a DEI clerk, and then you get a DEI judge. Same clerk, boom, boom, boom. That's amazing. That's the nepotism there is horrendous, and for a person to digest that, that's me. It's just not, we're not compatible, honestly. So, I was terminated eventually for comments that I made about that DEI community, which is true. It's factual. I don't care. I like facts more than ideology or propaganda. But the honest truth is that most people there did not agree either, because I know, because they made it verbal. People would always ask me, "Hey, what do you think about the clerk being the lover of this federal judge, getting that position, and then in 3 years she became a federal judge herself." Everybody there was saying these things, was repeating these things. Very horrendous behavior from federal judges, clerks, etc. But nobody's holding that accountable, and obviously, them being judges and being the masters of law, they're going to fly right below the radar of technicalities and laws and policies and whatever, because that's what they're good at. If you apply the same thing to countries like China or Cuba or Russia, when it comes to not showing true equality or fairness or justice, or whatever you want to throw at it. Oh, that's because they're this. That's because they're this type of government. No, but over here we justify things with the stupidest of propagandas and ideologies and policies. I want everybody to have a fair chance, not to have a hookup, a legal hookup. That's a whole different thing. Everybody should have a chance, including the Rainbow Group. Yeah, they should have the chance, but they have to earn it. And this is something that as you all may know, has me a little pissed, and it has a lot of people pissed there. The people that are still working there, I know, because they mentioned it. They verbalized it. They among themselves. They have these conversations among themselves. In my opinion, once again, going back to accountability, I think there should be a mechanism, maybe a website, maybe an application where you can report your previous employer, their work environment, the toxicity levels, how they treat their employees. The same way that, and I mentioned this before in previous videos, the same way that an employer wants to call the ex-employer of this potential employee to see performance, verification, employment verification. I think there should also be the same thing in reverse for employees to do the same thing and try to find out what is this place like, how are the managers. Now, I know somebody mentioned on a comment that Glassdoor comes close to that. And once again, I actually liked that video that I saw. He was the owner. He became a covert employee, and he realized all the wrongs that were going on in his company, and then he was determined to fix it and give people a second chance, because he could have fired a bunch of people there. And I think that should apply to government, state, federal, where I came from, and anywhere in society. Everybody should be scrutinized and analyzed and studied fairly, and by truly independent investigators, not other employees that agree with the crap and are just going through the song and dance to legitimize the crap. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there should be a truly independent entity out there, preferably maybe federal, that will, starting at that federal level down, would analyze each workplace, the behavior, the accountability, the fairness, the justice, the true equality, and also, again, micromanage human resources, especially since human resources tends to want to micromanage behavior. It should be reciprocal. It should be a two-way street. Who's watching the watchers, like I've said before. Who is auditing the auditors, type scenario. Because when you give, especially emotionally unstable women, a position of HR, that's not good. That's chaos, waiting to happen. And you're never gonna really achieve a healthy workplace with HR personnel that has their own, biases, traumas, etc. And I'm referring to U.S. District Court of Puerto Rico, particularly probation. So once again, I like that video. I like the fact that he did that with the intention to correct, not necessarily terminate. If it's necessary to terminate, obviously it's necessary. But you can't, you just can't go about, terminating people without proper trainings, proper orientation, etc. And throwing a book at things, no, you got to read the manual. No, that doesn't work. That never really works. Nobody ever reads the manual when they buy a little something to put together, or it's that just doesn't work. That's just lazy HR behavior. That's just lazy, incompetent human resources, not really doing their job. And I've always seen through the years that HR has plenty of mandatory meetings or mandatory orientations or trainings, and most of it is just pure garbage. Again, very low IQ females, in my opinion, because most of them are females. They should really get down to the point, and specifically and clearly in those trainings, clearly define what is right and what is wrong. We don't need Susie explaining how many years she's been doing this, and I've been to this place and that place, and nobody cares for that. Again, this is a man thing. Women, you guys are so complacent with garbage. It's just amazing. Now I understand why ancient religions did not give you guys too much power in making important decisions, because your emotions and your silliness gets involved, and your childish tendencies will tend to corrupt the fairness and the true empathy across the board. So once again, I truly believe that was a pretty cool video. I think everybody should be held accountable, especially HR, because they're always holding others accountable for misconduct. But who's holding HR? And I don't mean, the director holds them accountable. No, the director is too busy doing other stuff. He doesn't care. He actually trusts too much on HR, when HR most of the time are a bunch of silly women. And sometimes when the director is a DEI hire as well, with very low experience or minimal experience, they're not going to do a good job either. So again, that's why I think something independent with a lot of competence should be auditing or analyzing workplaces, especially when somebody complains. But there's nowhere for people to go complain and say, hey, this HR place and this director and this, they treated me this way or that way. No, there really isn't. There really isn't. And independent, at least. I mean, totally independent. Not within the within. A completely independent entity. Preferably private. With the backing of federal, but again, totally private and independent, with non-biasness at all. With no DEI hires in that private company, no woke people. Again, it will have to be. And I'm not saying all conservative either. It'll have to be a well-balanced group of people that will have to do this. And again, that's my opinion. Till next time.